In the videos for this module, we will be covering shape layers. Shape layers are a feature of After Effects which allows you to create vector-based graphics inside After Effects. Think of them as a mini Illustrator, a mini version of Illustrator inside After Effects, which allows you to create vector-based graphics, which, as you know, are procedural in nature and they're non-destructive, which means that they can be resized to any size you want without significantly changing the quality of the output of what you are creating. Now, what is the difference between that and any other image that you bring in? So when you're talking about shapes, you're talking, like I've been saying all along, vector images. So there are two types of images that you see on the screen: vector-based images and raster-based images. Vector-based images are mathematically generated. That is, they are created with algorithms. So you don't have to type them up. As you know, if you work with Illustrator, you create a graphic that automatically is considered to be a vector image. However, when you're talking about Photoshop images, those are considered to be raster images. They're pixel-based. So the way they treat information is different. So how does that work in After Effects? Well, let's go ahead and create a new composition, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to name this one raster versus vector. Okay, and so let me actually change the background color of that composition to black and click OK. Now, over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a solid, and a solid is a type of rectangle that can be generated within After Effects, but these rectangles are raster based. So that is one major difference between a solid and a shape layer. So to create a solid, I go to Layer, to the Layer dropdown, New, Solid. Like I said before, the solids are simply rectangles. And I'm just gonna, make it a white solid. In this case, I'm gonna give it a size of about 500 by 500. And I'm gonna maintain my the pixel aspect ratio for that solid to be the same as the composition, which is square pixels. And the measurement for it under pixels, because I'm working in After Effects. So I'm gonna keep it like that. You can also, if you click on comp size, it will make the solid a rectangle that covers the entirety of your comp's visibility. And you can change the color down here by clicking on the color swatch and picking a different color. So I'm just going to pick white, and then I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. Now, as you'll notice, I get a new layer in my composition. I have a new folder with the solid layer inside it, and I see it in my composition window. So that's basically a solid, just a solid rectangle. That's all it is, but it is raster based. Now, how do I differentiate between that and a vector-based rectangle? Well, let me go ahead and deselect everything. I'm going to click on the gray area here on my pasteboard, or down here somewhere in the gray area in my timeline, and I am going to select the rectangle tool. We have used this tool in the past to create masks. And so I've told you, if you work with them with a layer selected, you will be creating a mask. But if you are working with it without anything being selected, then you are telling the program, I want to create a shape. And so when I click on that rectangle tool, notice that this becomes available to me because nothing is selected. All these features become available to me that tell me, okay, what are you creating? And in this case, I'm going to create a solid. I can give it a fill color, a shape, or I can give it a stroke color if I want to click on the stroke and decide whether I want a gradient, a radial gradient, linear gradient, solid color, and so on. So if I want a solid color, I can go ahead and define what color I want. By default, it will give you a color, and then you can choose when you click on the swatch to choose whatever color you want. To turn off that stroke, simply click on the word stroke and choose none. Same thing for fill. If you click on fill, you can click on that as well and do that. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to draw that solid. So that shape. Sorry, I keep on saying shape. What you're seeing right now is a solid. I am about to create a shape. You will notice also that my mouse has that little icon that looks like a little star, which indicates I am not creating a mask. I am creating a shape. So I'm going to click and drag across to match that other solid that I have behind it. And there you go. You'll notice now that I have a new layer called Shape Layer 1. And below it, I have the solid. So let me click on the gray area to deselect everything. And let's see what the differences are between these two things. So if I go ahead and, for example, let me turn off the visibility of my shape layer. If I select my solid layer and I apply a mask to it with the same tool. I am simply going to select the layer. I'm going to go to the drop-down menu for that, and I'm going to use the rounded rectangle tool. And I am going to draw a mask across it. Now, if I want my rectangle to match the size of my mask, I just undid that by pressing Ctrl-Z. If I want that mask to match the size of the layer, I can double-click the tool up here. So if I double-click, you will notice that the shape gets a mask. You'll notice that it is down here as well in the timeline, and it matches the height and width of that layer. So that's one way to apply a mask to the entirety of the artwork of a layer, if that's what your intent is, which is what I was trying to do. Or you can click and drag, as I was doing a second ago. And as I showed you when we were talking about masks in the masks video a module ago. So now in this case, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and move the anchor point of this composition to the corner. So let me go ahead and use my pan behind tool and move this up here so that I can increase the size of it. And you can see what happens when I increase the size of this. So right now it looks fairly nice, very solid edges on that shape or on that solid. And what I want to do is I want to call the scaling property for that layer, and I want to increase it to about 1,000. When I do that, you'll notice that I automatically get this little staircasing on the edge, and it gets really blurry. That means that that solid is rasterized. That means that it's not increasing in size nicely, and it's not maintaining the sharpness of the edges on the actual object. So let me go ahead and turn the visibility off on that and turn on the visibility on my shape layer. Now, in this case, I want to change my shape layer from a solid rectangle to a rounded rectangle. One of the beautiful things about this is that you can have more than one shape inside one shape layer. So you can have shape layers to be separate if you want them to be, but a shape layer can contain several shapes. So if I select that shape layer and I click on shape, on the shape that I want, you will notice that my properties get activated and I get the choice of either whether I want to create a mask for that layer, which is this up here, or I want to create a shape, which is by default what is selected. So if I click on that to activate it, if I start drawing right now, I will be creating yet another shape inside that shape layer. And that's in fact what I want to do. I want to go ahead and create a rounded rectangle shape, and I'm going to try to match the one that was there before, the shape that was there before, as closely as I can. Now, you'll notice that when I deselect, I still see my original rectangle, which was rectangle 1, but when I turn off its visibility inside the shape layer, you'll notice that under the shape layer, if I uncollapse the layer, I have both contents and transformations. Transformations apply obviously to everything within the layer. So if I rotate the layer, the entirety of the content rotates. But if I go inside the contents of that shape layer, now I have the two rectangles. The first one that I had drawn with the sharp angles and the rounded corner one. So if I turn off the visibility on the first one by turning off its visibility and I deselect, I see now that I have my second object available to me. And each one of them, by the way, has its own set of transformations and its own set of properties. So if you uncollapse those, you will have access to any of those properties within that shape layer independently, including things such as anchor point, position, scale, all of the things that we had available at the upper level layer level up here, all the way at the shape layer level, we have for each one of the contents within that layer, which means you can independently animate those shapes within one single layer, which saves you a lot of space when you're talking about working, adding a whole bunch of shapes into a screen, because you can contain them all within one single layer, and then when you don't need to see it anymore, you can collapse it and you'll notice that you gain a lot of real estate. So you can have more than one shape in one single layer. And like I said, if you uncollapse the contents for those and go to their transform dropdown, you have access to all of the different properties for that layer, including some cool things such as skew axis, and so on, which we will be using in future videos. You also have access to changing the fill color from in here. You can animate that change of fill color if you want to, which allows you to create different colors through time if you want. So there's a lot of stuff that, and we're going to be talking about through this module, we're going to be talking about all these things. So know that for now, you can have both of them. Now, the cool thing about this is that I can now go ahead and say, okay, I want to change the size of that rectangle to 1,000%. So if I go to that transform inside that rectangle too, and I go to its scaling value, and I go 1,000%, you will notice now, let me go ahead and change my tool to the move tool and bring the corner down so you can see it. You'll notice that the corner for that rectangle remains sharp. And that is because this is vector based, meaning it will be procedural as it is being created, and it can increase in size, and it won't break down the quality of the actual edges of the object. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that this behaves just like vector files brought in from Illustrator into After Effects. That is, when you render anything, as you're rendering, it is transformed into a raster image. So if you start doing a lot of scaling and rotation of these things, it might slow down your renders because it's the nature of things. You're literally asking the computer to recalculate not only the mathematical definition of the object that is vector-based, but its raster representation in pixels. And so the computer has to slow down to calculate all that. Now, it's not significant to the point that it's going to break down your computer, but it's something worth noting if you're working on a professional project and you're in a hurry and you want things to render fast. So, but the trade-off is that you get super high quality sharp images or sharp graphics as you are working on your files, which is, to me, it's a nice payoff. It's something that you really want to maintain, or the quality of the objects that you're working on. Another thing that is important to keep in mind is that these things are what we call parametric. And what that means for you is that you can actually, even though you have defined the shape, just like in Illustrator, you can actually go back and redefine the shape as having already created it. So let me go ahead and turn off the visibility of this layer. Let me collapse it. And from the same drop-down menu, I'm going to go ahead and select the star tool. Now, I'm not going to select any layers right now because I don't want to create a mask. I want to create a shape. So I want to go ahead and click and drag on the stage. I want to go ahead and create a star, and I'm pressing Shift so that it stays, right side up. I'm going to place it in the center of the screen. And if I go into the Polystar drop down and I go into its transformation values, I have basically all of the same things that I have for any of the other layers that you saw before, any of the other shapes that you saw before a second ago. But you also notice that as part of the contents inside the Polystar 1, I have something called Polystar Path. So if I open that up, I see definition of objects, of properties that affect the what we call the parametric values of this, the actual properties that affect the actual shape of the object. So for example, I have the ability to increase the amount of points if necessary. And if you notice to the left of this, it actually comes in with keyframing. So you actually can change this over time, which is extremely cool because you can create really complex shapes or complex objects that you can change over time and have absolute control over those objects and how they show up on the screen.